Hi, welcome to the Legislators Lounge. I'm Jim Webb, and my co-host is Brian Chirichiello. We're here today to talk about House Bill 617, which is basically the gas tax bill. Today with us we have Representative David Campbell from Nashua. He's the chairman of the Public Works Committee. And we have Representative Bill O'Brien from Mount Vernon, and he's the former Speaker of the House. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
And welcome, representatives. We appreciate you coming on the show today. So Bill 617, we had the vote about 3 weeks ago at the House. We had some debate on it, and so I'll open it up to you, Representative Campbell. I know that this is your bill. You're the sponsor of the bill.
I'm the sponsor of it and chairman of the committee it came to, which deals with public works and highways, actually. But yeah, as it passed the House, it came out a 12-cent gas tax increase, which is called the road toll, actually. But it's 4 cents, 4 cents, 4 cents, phased in over 3 years, 12 cents in total. Before we get into the merits of the bill and why we went that way, I'd like to discuss the problem that kind of prompted the reason for it, and that's the condition of our roads and bridges. I've gone around the state saying that we have an infrastructure crisis, and I don't think it's understated. And I'll give you 4 major areas that show that we do have a crisis. And the first is I-93, which you people in Derry are very familiar with. That project is $250 million underfunded, and without new revenue, without $250 million more of new revenue, that project will not finish, it will not be completed, and the road itself will fail, and millions of taxpayers' dollars will be wasted. The second area is the condition of our roads and the pavement conditions. And I can show you later why that's happened, but the fact is in 2000 we had 600 miles of road rated in poor condition, which means some major work is required versus just paving it. That number has ballooned to over 1,660 miles today. We have 4,500 miles of road in the state. If you stretch it all out, that would run from Concord to Los Angeles and back to just about St. Louis. That's a lot of road, and a third of that now is in poor condition, which means it's more expensive to fix. The third area, which I have a chart for, is our bridge conditions, something called red-listed bridges. A red-list bridge is a bridge that is either obsolete in some way, meaning it's not handling its design load, but more commonly it has at least one structural defect. And we have 140 state red-list bridges, which are, I call this the measles chart. Just shows you how we do have an epidemic of red-list bridges. The circled ones are the 140 state red-list bridges. They're on state roads. And the little squares is 353 municipal red-list bridges. And that's, I think, the time bomb in the whole system. There's a lot of little bridges in a lot of towns that are really old. The reason we got here is because stagnant revenue. The gas tax hasn't been raised since 1991, and with high mileage cars, the volume has flattened out. In fact, it's decreasing about 0.5% a year. Hyper construction inflation has contributed to our need for our ability to deal with our infrastructure, and we have an aging system. Most of the system was, most of the bridges and roads were built in the 1950s or later, or earlier, I should say, further back in time, and all of those things have contributed to the deterioration of our system. I have some other charts, but I'll let Representative O'Brien.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into more details, but.
Well, I'd like to ask Representative O'Brien. I know you had submitted an amendment to Representative Campbell's bill. Would you like to talk to that a little bit?
Sure, and again, I do appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate Representative Campbell's explanation and his hard work on this, because I know he's genuinely concerned about the condition of our highway infrastructure and believes he has an approach to deal with it. And for purposes of the debate in the House and the discussion here today, I'm not going to challenge the fact that there's highway infrastructure needs. I do get a little bit concerned. I look at that map there, and I see in my community there's a red-listed bridge, and it's been red-listed since 1984 and has managed to not fall down during that time period. And indeed, I travel over it every day. I go to Concord, and as I said in the House floor, I've kayaked under it, and it seems okay to me. But let's assume that there's a developing need to address red-listed bridges and the road condition, and certainly we want to complete I-93 expansion as quickly as we can. The concern I have is that we're immediately turning to new taxes, to what had started off as an 83% increase in taxes. Now we're told that it's much more reasonable because it's just a 67% increase in taxes. It was $1 billion. Now it's $750 million. If we're going to increase taxes, we ought to do that only when it's necessary. And what has happened is that over time, we have diverted substantial funds from what is called the highway fund. The highway trust fund is sometimes referred to. And we have dedicated revenue sources for that fund. As car registration, motor vehicle registration fees is a large amount that goes into it. And of course, the gas tax, sometimes referred to as a road toll, a toll tax. And Representative Campbell is absolutely correct. It hasn't been raised in a couple of decades, but that doesn't mean we have to raise. We don't have to raise taxes just because we haven't done it. We have to raise taxes because we need more money. What Representative Campbell didn't mention is that a substantial portion of those funds are diverted away from road construction and bridge construction and repair. There is a provision that was put into the New Hampshire Constitution, I think back in 1938. And that provision says that the funds that go into the highway fund, the revenue sources, are supposed to be used for highways, construction, repair, supervision of the highways. That last point, the supervision, has become the biggest leaky hole in the bucket that we're supposed to put highway trust funds. To the point that 3 or 4 years ago, we actually passed a statute that says no more than 27% is supposed to be diverted out of the highway trust fund. And then we started suspending that statute. And even in Governor Hessen's latest budget proposal, she wants to suspend it and have a third, 33%, go into uses other than road construction and road repair. Now, if we just took that leaky bucket and plugged the holes in it, if we stopped the diversion, as the amendment that we put in both when the bill was here, having been recommended by Representative Campbell's committee, and then later when it went to Ways and Means, the tax committee, and it came back slightly smaller. If we had just passed that amendment, we wouldn't need the tax, because that would be approximately $75 million more a year that would be available for road construction, road repair. What it would mean is that those agencies, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office, the court system, the Department of Safety with the state police, would have to come in and make their arguments for their funding just like any other agency does. There was initially a response to my proposal is you're going to lay off all the state police. It turns out it wasn't all the state police, 311 positions. About half of them are funded through this diversion of highway trust funds. I think having state police is a core function of government. I think that they can easily make their case, but they have to make their case in a context of, Health and Human Services wanting to fund fully the developmentally disabled wait list, the children in need of services being refunded, something we couldn't do when we put together the budget we're living under now. The budget we're living under now, because we didn't want to raise any taxes, we had to cut back UNH funding by about half.
Right.
You have to make choices. You just can't say, I'm not going to make a choice, I'm just going to increase taxes. That's a concern we have.
Let me address that in two areas if I could. First, HB 617, the bill that's raising the gas tax 12 cents over 3 years. That bill, every single penny of that, the revenue raise, the extra revenue raise, goes to state and municipal roads and bridges. As amended, it's been tightened up. There's no diversion. There's no leaky bucket. All of that money, by the fact that it's highway fund money first, the fact that it sets up a separate account within the in the highway fund called the municipal and state road and bridge account, and that says it all has to go for the construction, reconstruction, and maintenance of state and municipal roads and bridges. 12% of this money, by the way, goes right to communities. 12% of the money off the top goes to the communities, and we have lists that show how much different communities get. Derry gets hundreds of thousands of dollars more over a 10-year period. And that's that is essential, because I think people understand that we need money to fix roads and bridges. You can't do it with rhetoric, you can't do it with ideology, you have to do it with money. And as long as the money raised goes to that purpose, I think people understand that. But what Representative O'Brien mentions is Article 6A of the Constitution, which was passed in 1938. And I have a copy of it right here, and it does say that all the revenue should be used for roads and bridges, for the exclusively for construction, reconstruction, and maintenance of public highways in the state, including the supervision of traffic thereon, and that means the state police. If you look back at the record when this was passed, they actually talked about this, and they said state police. Should we put it in the amendment, or should we not put it in the amendment? Right. So they put it in, and as a result, and then it says any other purpose should not be diverted. So using it for state police is not a diversion, and over the years, and not just the last couple of budgets, but over the last several decades, state police have been funded through the highway fund. And that hasn't changed for a long time.
What's the percentage that the state police would receive under the bill? Do you have that figure by any chance? Or I mean, what?
I do, actually. If HB 617 passes and that new revenue comes in, 72% of the money in the highway fund will go to the DOT, and 26% will go to safety. And in the second year, it's more because it phases in at 74 and 24. That's different than what's in there right now, but that doesn't include the new revenue that's coming in. One thing I do want to do, though, before we get into this debate, which will probably consume most of the hour, just for the benefit of your viewers, I'd like to just go through, if I could, some of these charts, because even though we both agree there's a problem, I think your viewers need to know the extent of the problem and the reason for it.
But before we do that,
Yeah,
could I just respond to one
absolutely.
point? Representative Campbell was responsive to the earlier debate, and as I mentioned before, did reduce the size of the tax increase being requested from 83% down to 67%. I still don't think it's either reasonable or necessary. And there was language in the bill that would say the net increase, not the 18 cents per gallon that we're getting now, but the net increase wouldn't be diverted. And again, that's somewhat responsive. We are looking for a completely responsive reaction to it, because none of it should be diverted. And moreover, we're very concerned that Governor Hassan hasn't signed up to this approach of not diverting any portion of the increase. And as we all know, when House Bill 2, the budget is in two bills, House Bill 1, House Bill 2. House Bill 1 has the figures, House Bill 2 has the statutory changes to enable the budget. When that comes forward, I think it's a pipe dream to think that it's going to include language that says don't divert money out of the Highway Trust Fund that is represented by these new taxes, because the budget is substantially out of balance
But
now.
HB 617, that bill itself, no money, the extra money raised from that bill does not go anywhere but to roads and bridges.
And you know, David, it's sort of like the language we have in the statute that says don't divert more than 27%, and that's always honored in the breach. And we can put anything we want in House Bill 617.
We can't bind a future legislature, I understand that, but this is as tight as it can get in this for this legislative session.
But we cannot increase the tax.
Well, let me point out one thing, in fairness, because when you were Speaker and you were responsible for the budgets, it was approximately 29% of the money went to safety, and approximately 29% now goes to safety before you put in the extra money, which will knock the percentage down.
And so you said we're going into this crisis. And if we're going into the crisis, let's not continue dishonest budgets.
Well, that's going to be a whole other show.
That's the
We're going
next
to
show.
get into that.
well, I do want to say, but you are recognizing, I guess, the scope of the problem, because you raise as much money as, by I think it's $75 million a year, as this raises.
You know, Dave, you and I are both lawyers. Remember the old thing we used to say in law school, assuming arguendo? That means assuming for the purpose of the argument the validity of the underlying problem.
Right.
And I'm going to assume arguendo that there's a problem with highway infrastructure, and I really admire your tenacity in trying to address it. I don't think increasing taxes, however, is the way to address it.
And we'll get back to that. But this is really the crux of how we got to where we are, the problem. You need, in this northern climate, to keep a road in good condition, engineering-wise, and be cost-efficient, you should pave it every 8 to 10 years. Now, you've got 4,500 miles of road, divide that by 9, and you get 500, right? It's about 500 miles. That's been the target for a long time. This is a 20-year chart. It goes from 1990 to 2015. And you can see here this yellow line. That's 500 miles a year of paving. And you can see once in 1991, once the gas tax was raised back then, it was raised twice, by the way, 2 cents and then another 2 cents when Judd Gregg was governor. It was the last time. So you can see for a while they were hitting that 500-mile target all the way out to about 2000. And then it starts to dip. And the reason it starts to dip is mostly because of inflation.
And the times, I mean.
Well, it was inflation. The economy was hot here. It was really super hot. People were driving SUVs. Volumes were up of gallonage. But what happened was gas prices went up. Fuel that goes into asphalt, cement, steel, road salt. The commodities went up. And this goes down, 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 to the point where we had a crisis.
Right.
But then the federal stimulus package came along, and it didn't have near as much money as it should have, I believe, for infrastructure. But with that money, we were able to pave almost 750 miles of road, and another big chunk the next year. So that gave us some relief, and we did a lot of paving. But that money ran out down here. So we plugged the hole, if you remember, with the $30 registration surcharge, which was politically very unpopular, but it was put in for a two-year period and sunsetted. So when it sunsetted, this is the surcharge. Now it's sunsetted, so now we're heading back down to here. So we're going to be doing half the amount of miles that you're supposed to do. How'd you get here? Here's that inflation I was talking about. If you look at, I'm going to take that one right off. Yeah, this shows the yellow is gas tax revenue, and the revenue, even though the rate was flat, the volume of gasoline went up, so therefore you raised more money for many years. But then we hit 2 periods. First, we hit the hyperinflation. So inflation's kind of keeping up with the volume. Everything's kind of good. And this is to answer your question, how did this crisis suddenly appear? Well, it appears over the last decade, basically. And what happens is commodities take off. This is the price of asphalt versus the road toll revenue. So asphalt prices started leaping up. Look at this, over just a 4-year period. It went up. This is 480% over the last 20 years, and gas toll revenue has gone up 40%. So now we have this huge inflationary gap. And what does that mean? That means you can only pave 64% less roads today with the same money than you could 20 years ago. That's because of inflation. That's what inflation has done. It's eroded our ability to keep up with our roads. Now, what happens if we don't pave them every 8 to 12 years? Right now, we're on a cycle maybe of double that, maybe every 18 years. By doing that every 18 years, the road isn't just, well, we waited another 8 years and it's going to cost the same. No, it costs much more because now you're rebuilding the road. A road that just needs to be paved is $50,000. A road that needs to be rebuilt can be all the way up to $1 million a mile.
Right. Now, so do we as a state have a priority list of what roads, I mean, do we grade them and then we say, look, we've got a 10 or 15-year plan here and we're going to do, these particular roads first?
Well, DOT, if they were there, would tell you this, and this is the crux of the problem, is people say, geez, you're paving the good road instead of paving my road, which is really bad. Problem is, we can't afford to do all the bad roads at once. You can only peck away at those because it's much more costly. And what you don't want to do is have your good roads fall into disrepair and then become very much expensive too.
Right.
So they're balancing the ability to try to keep the good roads from going bad and trying to work away. And that's why they need more money. I always say and I understand the representative's concerns about taxes, but I say it's fiscally irresponsible not to take care of the problem because the problem grows, gets worse, and becomes more expensive. And at some point, somebody's going to have to fix it.
Well, I'd like to break in on that. And it was during our debate on the floor, somebody had mentioned how New Hampshire's roads aren't as bad as the rest of New England. So I actually went online and I got the roads and the statistics here from it's from the Council on State Governments. And if you look through this chart that I downloaded, New Hampshire has the best roads in New England, actually. We have the lowest amount of bridges. We're at 16%, whereas the worst would be 39%, and that's in Massachusetts, which has a high income tax and a high sales tax.
And a higher gas tax. Higher than ours.
Well, their gas tax may be higher than ours, but our price of gasoline is higher, and that's another thing I want to lead into as I get up and spoke on the floor about. Derry's a commuter town. Our people And so isn't most of southern New Hampshire. Almost 30% of the population in New Hampshire works in Massachusetts. So my wife drives to Massachusetts every day. If the gas is cheaper in Massachusetts, she's going to fill her tank up down there. And right now, it's about even or a little cheaper down there, even though they have a higher gas tax. Now, for whatever reason that be, it really don't matter because.
But that's a very important point, and you're absolutely right. Massachusetts has a higher gas tax. Maine is I believe, 10 cents higher. We had 2 gas station owners on our committee, one up in Ossipee area and one down in Wyndham. And so they're familiar with the border wars as far as gas goes. Now, even though the gas tax is higher down there, the price is often less. And you know why that is? Gas taxes don't pass through penny for penny. That's the other thing. There's 2 good things about the gas tax, 3 things. It's a user fee. The more you drive, the more you pay. The less you drive, the less you pay. The other thing is it doesn't pass through penny for penny, and I can talk to you about that.
Well,
and the other is,
I understand that.
out-of-staters come in. Out-of-staters come in, you fill up their tanks here, and every time they do, they're contributing to our roads and bridges. What other tax do we have that except for rooms
that's
and
the
roads?
only
You know,
good part
I think
about it.
most of us approach these issues with a modicum of common sense, and I think that's going to lead us to conclude that raising taxes doesn't make something cheaper. Indeed, it makes it more expensive. I suspect that the difference between the price of gas in Maine and New Hampshire is reflection of the distance from distribution. Where does gas come in? It comes in.
I'd argue with that because the price of gas in Concord is
I was
at
gonna say.
least 10 to 20 cents less than Derry.
And so there's local conditions that produce competition and so forth. But if you're saying, as I believe you were, and as Representative Campbell was, that somehow or another it's cheaper in Massachusetts, though the gas tax is
All I'm saying-
higher there,
all
it
I'm-
probably has nothing more to do
I'm not,
than
I'm,
shipping
not
costs.
I'm not saying that raising it doesn't have some effect, but it's not a penny for penny pass through. And the reason is the gas companies, the oil companies, they set the price of gas demographically by what the area can bear. I mean, I grew up in Newport, New Hampshire, which is a much poorer area than Nashua, where I live now. I go up there and the gas is further away, but it's routinely cheaper up there. And that's because they price it by what the area can bear. And that doesn't mean, and there's so much fluff in the price of gasoline now. You see the gasoline prices fluctuate 20, 30 cents in a month. They're on the decline right now. We've noticed that over the past few weeks. I've gone around and said, I do not believe that 4 cents over 3 years, when we can fix our roads and bridges, when we can help our economy, we can help compete for jobs and businesses, is going to be more damaging. That fixing our roads and bridges is more damaging than that 4 cents that won't pass
But
through penny for penny.
the choice is a false one, Representative. The choice isn't between raising taxes and having good roads, or not raising taxes and having bad roads. The choice is whether or not we take the money we raise now and use it honestly. And if we do use it honestly, if we use the gas tax we raise now, it's going to make up the difference. You know, if you take a look at that first small chart that you had there, it's the one that's right at the back, which you reflected the shortfall, that one there. How much is represented between, in terms of dollars, between the amount we want to pave and that 500 miles rather? I suspect that if we didn't divert $75 million a year, we could work our way right up to that 500-mile level. And if we do that, then it does mean we're going to have to make spending choices in other parts of the budget. You're right. I ran the House when we had to make spending choices, and it isn't easy to do.
That wasn't one you made.
Right. We had to make a choice to cut back spending in other areas because we had an $800 million deficit. So we weren't of a mind to accelerate the deficit by, for example, taking more money out of the general fund. But now is the time to do it. We're told that we have to increase the tax 67%. We first should show financial discipline. You know, this is a perennial problem. Back in 1996, when Ovid Lamontagne and Jean Shaheen were running for governor, it came up in one of the televised debates. And someone sent me a link to that debate. And both Mr. Lamontagne and now Senator Shaheen, then gubernatorial candidate Shaheen, both gave the same answer when they said, what are we going to do about the red-listed bridges? They had red-listed bridges 17 years ago. And both of them said, and actually Senator Shaheen was much more vocal on it, saying we have to stop diverting money out of the Highway Trust Fund. That's all we're saying now, is stop diverting money. Will there come a point where perhaps the road tax, the toll tax isn't enough? Yes, we're not at that point.
Well, I just have to say, state police is not a diversion. It's right in 6A. Anything else besides the state police and the roads and bridges is a diversion. And, you know, I just don't see how you can, what you're suggesting has one major flaw in it. It's why you didn't do it when you were in charge of the budget. And that is, you're fixing one hole, which is the highway fund hole, by creating another one in the general fund. And I just don't know, I don't know how that can be done. The other problem...
But your argument should be, why do we need state police? It shouldn't be, why do we have to pave roads? We have money to pave roads.
Well, here's
we have to argue why we need state police.
If you just take the money that's there, there's going to be no money for the municipalities. With the new money, money comes back to the municipalities. I looked up Derry while you were speaking. Derry, over 10 years, will get $1.9 million to help fix their roads and bridges. Now, that's new revenue they don't have today. And if that doesn't happen, how are they going to fix their roads and bridges? You have two ways, state aid and property taxes.
Well, why would Derry get that when we have no red-listed bridges in Derry?
Well, but you have roads that are in bad conditions. You have roads that are in bad conditions, state roads that are in bad conditions, and local roads that are in bad conditions. And you talk to your road agent, and he'll point out plenty of them. And they're not going to get better over time. Everybody's down here doing less than the optimum amount. And the problem is, as I say, it's $50,000 a mile to do a road in good condition, and it becomes up to $1 million a mile to do it in bad condition, and that sliding scale happens the more years you go out.
Now, I'm looking at the bill in front of me here, and it looks like you have some estimates on the amount of gallons for fiscal 2014 through 17, and I noticed that it drops by 13 million gallons. Is there a reason why it drops?
We get those numbers from the Road Toll Bureau, which Department of Safety, which actually collects the money, and they're saying that we should expect the gasoline revenues to drop about 0.5%, which is probably 13 million each year going out into the future. That's because you get more hybrid cars, more electric cars, more high mileage cars, and that's just the way. It's still a very sustainable source of revenue for the next 10 or 15 year horizon, which is why some of us have chosen, to raise the road toll, the gas tax, and believe it is necessary. It's happening all over the country, by the way. The state of Wyoming, and it's not a partisan issue either, and no one's really cast it that way, and I think that's fair. But Wyoming has the most Republican legislature in the country. 87% of both houses. 87%. Talk about veto proof. You only had 75%. They were Republican GOP dominated. They just raised their gas tax from 14 cents to 24 cents in one fell swoop, 10 cents. They did it for the same reasons. Those charts of hyperinflation affect every state.
Maybe they'd stop diverting earlier.
Well, take away the diverting and all that. If people don't, like for instance, we've curbed our casual drives, and we don't drive as much now because the price is so high. When you have somebody who works in Boston, like my wife, and when she's dishing out easily $600 a month to go to work, that's just to go to work in gasoline. At $3.75 or $4 a gallon, whatever that was at the highest point. I think people have kind of curbed their driving, which is another issue here.
Another reason the volume's going down, actually.
Volume goes down because of that. And then they compensate by raising the price, so we'll pay more for it.
But the question really is I mean, I agree that infrastructure is very important. It's an economic driver, and we've got to do something. So.
But just to give some perspective on say it does pass through penny for penny, which I don't believe it does, and I think the stats show it doesn't, but say it does, and say every penny that goes up will be paid for by the consumer. 4 cents, 4 cents, 4 cents. That's going to be, if you drive 12,000 miles a year, and you get about 22 miles a gallon, and that's fairly average, but if that's what, you're going to cost you about $22 more for each 4 cent increment, and when it's all in, about $65 more. And the price for that is having good roads, good bridges, a good economy, businesses moving into the state instead of moving out of the state, and if you drive more, you're going to pay more, and if you drive less, you're going to pay less. So it is a cost, it is a tax. There's no question about that, but it's a necessary revenue source in order to fix a big problem that only state government can take care of. At least it's one of these things that we can all agree that this is what government does. We fix bridges and roads.
Yeah, when we raise these consumption taxes, and that's what this is,
Yes.
essentially a sales tax on gasoline, or we raise the sales tax for tobacco, for example, which we all really, think this is great. We don't want people to smoke. Let's go raise the tax. People are driving instead of using the roads. Let's tax them. It doesn't hurt you and me so much, Dave. It hurts somebody like John Burt's constituent, Tina, the woman who works as a sales clerk in a fast food store. For her, having to pay $3 more for a fill-up, it's a major deal.
$3 more for a fill-up.
Well, it will be. It will be.
How big's their tank? 12 cents.
Well, a 20-gallon tank would be $2.40.
Not $3, and that's once it's all phased in.
That's a lot of money for somebody.
I understand.
It's a gallon
I
of milk.
understand.
I mean, for a lot of us, we can say,
But it is a user fee, and I just don't know how to do it. I can't think of a more fair way of raising this than the gas tax. That's why it's the preferred way in many states. Michigan, Virginia, Maryland, they're all doing it. And they're all Republican states. So people are trying to wrestle with an issue that can be catastrophic if it's not taken care of. And if we don't fix it now, it becomes more expensive. And how are we going to fix it 10 years from now when it's more expensive? What kind of havoc is that going to be? You call it a consumption tax. I'd call it a user fee. It's really a user fee.
Let's talk about our options. And what are the options to to fix these roads that over time will break down?
The amendment that we bought is the option. The first year that this tax is in place, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, because I know you're really good at these figures, but I think it's like $38 to $40 million more will be available. If we just don't divert, that's $75 million a year. So we can accelerate the fixing of red-listed bridges. We can accelerate the construction of I-93 if we just stop diverting. And yes, it will not be an easy process to have some of these agencies, the Department of Justice come in from the Attorney General's office, the court system come in and say, I need more money than UNH needs, or I need more, and you have to make a choice to give it to me rather than UNH or the CHINS program or the Development of Disabled Waiting List.
Okay.
But that's what we do as responsible elected officials.
But it wasn't done in the 2 years you were there. It creates such a budget hole on one side. I don't see how you can balance it with the other. The other thing is, you take all that money, you take $75 million. The cost of collection, motor vehicles is funded by the highway fund. I think the number is approximately $15 million a year. That is their cost to run the department. And that's your licensing, registration. That's your second, behind the gas tax, right behind it is registration fees and licensing fees. That also goes on the highway fund. Well, if you take away that 18 million, or it's 15 or 18, I can't remember the number, but it's in that ballpark. If you take away that number, which you are doing by giving it all to roads and bridges, then you can't collect a big chunk that also goes in the highway fund, which is licensing and registration fees. So your 75 million becomes 60 million, and at some point it's not enough money. $250 million is needed just to fix I-93.
And that's true about the registration fees. I know from the town of Derry, we've seen a lot of people not buying new cars. They're buying older cars, and those registration fees have just not come in for the revenue side of the town. So we've seen that over the last 3 or 4 years.
So over time, revenue sources can become less robust. The gas tax isn't going to raise as much as we need. That can happen over time.
Right.
I think the difference between Representative Campbell and myself is I don't think we've reached the time where we have to say we have to increase this. Taking more money from people in taxes should be considered a very serious thing to do. Now, it shouldn't be done unless you can answer the question, is there not an alternative?
It is a very serious.
And here there's an alternative.
Well, I think we've exhausted all the one-time fixes. We've exhausted, in fact, the highway fund is taking a big hit this year because one of the one-time fixes was selling a piece of the highway up on the turnpike to the turnpike system, which is different. People don't realize that when they say the toll booths only feed 90 miles of our roadway, which is the turnpike system. Toll booth revenue goes to the turnpikes, and the turnpikes are 90 miles. Runs from Seabrook to the Maine border, from the Portsmouth traffic circle up to Rochester, and from the Nashua border up to Concord. Those are the 3 turnpikes in the state. Right. And people say, well, raise the toll booth or raise it. That's where that money goes. That pays for the bonds. And those roads are in pretty good shape because they have the toll booths. So what are other options? Other options are registration fees and gas tax. We don't have an income tax in the state, and many people are grateful for that. And that's how other states can do it. But we have to rely on the sources of revenue that have historically done it. And it used to be something that we just did routinely in the state. If you needed more money, they went up very gradually in the gas tax. If you just put a regular inflation number on the 18 cents from 1991, it would be about 30 cents today. So that's 12 cents more than it is. We didn't keep up with it, and now we've got to pay the price. And if we don't pay the price, my concern is the problem gets worse and it gets more expensive exponentially.
Can I bring up another perspective here? And this is a concern I think you and I should share on this, because I really do want there to be more money available to address highway infrastructure. My sense is that House Bill 617, when it gets to the Senate, is not going to pass. I almost said dead on arrival, but it's pejorative. We're going to be left without a solution then. If we don't get a solution of a tax increase,
Which is a very serious matter.
and if we don't get a solution of let's put in place legislation that was represented by my amendment to House Bill 617, which is stop diverting, then we're going to be in a situation where, in that chart there, where that blue line is going to be getting lower and lower, and and we will have lost the opportunity of this debate to get a solution in place.
I'm going to ask a hypothetical. If your amendment had passed, do you think it would have passed in the Senate?
Actually, I think it stood a pretty good chance. I had some of the senators actually come to me and thank me for having brought the amendment and having conducted the debate, because...
But nobody's offered to bring it forth at this point, right?
But I think if we'd sent it over there... No, because there's other issues there.
Yes,
As you know, there's other more favored revenue sources than increasing the gas tax.
We should discuss that too, because you had your show on gambling, and in fairness to Senator Morrison and that bill, their solution, or partial solution, I would call it, is to fund some of the roads and bridges through casino revenue.
Right.
And if you took the average amount of revenue that the bill says it'll raise, and you take the middle number, that it would bring in about $44 million a year, which is about half of what you need to take care of. I mean, then you start making choices. Are you going to do 90? It'll take care of I-93, but it won't take care of the roads. It won't take care of the bridges. And here's a couple other reasons that I don't favor that. I do favor casino gambling, and that's another show completely.
Right.
But I don't favor it for roads and bridges, because first, it's not protected money. Doesn't have Article 6A saying it can only be used for highway purposes, so it's more rateable.
So it could be diverted.
Well, diverted or completely rated. Yeah, just, I mean, the revenue doesn't have to be for highway purposes.
Person's diversions is another rate.
Yeah. and there's no money for municipalities, which is also the problem with Representative Bryan's solution. It doesn't raise extra money for the municipalities that need it. And it's not bondable revenue. You can bond against gas tax revenue, can issue revenue bonds to take care of the fact that inflation is getting high again,
Right.
and the rates are low, but you can't do that against casino revenue.
Wouldn't you think that Representative O'Brien's amendment would be a start, and then if we needed to raise it 2 cents instead of 12 cents, we could possibly do something to that effect? So
I just don't see how Representative O'Brien's amendment can work, because it creates a $75 million hole. And it can't be $75 million, because you still have to raise the reg fees. So you have to account for Department of Motor Vehicles doing their job, collecting that revenue, or you're going to create a $100 million deficit from not collecting the registration fees. So say it's $60 million. It creates a $60 million hole or $75 million hole in the general fund. And they have no money either. Where's that going to come from all at once?
It comes from budgeting discipline.
But you didn't have discipline last year.
We closed an $800 million hole by sitting with folks and say, here's the money we have. Help us work out what the best allocation is. We want to have an argument over red-listed bridges in order to fund activities that have nothing to do with red-listed bridges. That's the problem, I think, that some of us have with this debate.
But I just don't see why, if this was such a good choice, that 2 years ago, when you had control, the Republicans had control of both houses and you were in charge of the House, that you didn't make that switch then. That was the time to do it. And I think
we had an $800 million deficit.
We have a deficit now.
We don't have a deficit now.
Well, I mean, we have declining revenues, I should say.
Actually, the revenues are going to grow about 2 or 3%.
Really?
Yeah. Overall, from where
I'd like to bring in, you mentioned the stimulus earlier, and how that affected this chart and putting us on the positive side.
Just for a while, yeah.
Yep. But even the stimulus, when you have money, you don't tend to spend it in the right places. And I know here in Derry, or actually Wyndham, I do use the bike path, and there was a big green sign on our bike path saying this was paid for with stimulus money. To me, that's a waste of money. Although I'm not saying that the bike
I think
path
this
is a
chart
waste.
shows that we did spend it in the right place. They took the
But maybe
revenue
we didn't
money.
spend enough.
Well, they took the money that was allocated for highways and they put it all into paving. It went into paving because this chart was showing such a catastrophic decline in what we were doing, and the whole 8 to 10 year cycle, which is so important.
Right.
But they didn't specify where they were paving.
Well, that's
A
why
bike-
earlier I had
a
mentioned-
bike path versus a
Yeah.
highway.
And can I say this about DOT? DOT is often, I mean, some members of the House, I think wrongly and falsely, accuse DOT of being inefficient. And in fact, I was up to my committee the other day, and I came up through the 93, and I said, well, I want to make an announcement today. I saw one truck, 2 men, 2 shovels, both filling potholes. Because you always hear about the 1 man and the 7 guys standing around.
Right.
And that's false, too, because you don't know if they're waiting for another asphalt truck to
Yeah.
come in. Or I mean, those are anecdotal. But factually, DOT is one of the biggest departments in the state, and they're using 16% less employees today than they did 20 years ago. So they are becoming more efficient, and they have more miles of roads to take care of. So I think DOT does an excellent job, and I think they become lean and mean. We're down to the point now where we need money to fix roads and bridges.
So let's go back. I mean, the Senate hasn't listened to this at all yet, and we mentioned that it could have some heavy debate in the Senate. So where do you see that coming out? I mean, and if it doesn't, where does that leave us?
Well, until the Senate's solution or partial solution, because it doesn't raise enough money, the gambling is dealt with. I don't think they're going to probably act favorably on anything else.
Do you think there'd be a compromise in there at all? Or?
It's possible, as Representative O'Brien says. I mean, what if nothing happens? Then we really do have a problem with our roads and bridges.
Right.
We certainly should address this problem, and I think we agree on that. I'm not sure, if it's at the crisis pitch that the marketing terms red-listed bridges would suggest, because again, as you mentioned, some of them are just red-listed because they're, quote, obsolete.
Right.
Obsolete means that they don't comply with current federal highway standards, which in many cases is just the approach isn't right. I think, for example, the bridge that's in one of my towns, New Boston, that is deemed to be red listed is because it's a hilly town. There's a road that comes down to it that sort of curves going down and then approaches the bridge. And probably it doesn't meet federal highway standards in terms of the incline of approach to the bridge. It's not going to fall down. It's just something that's existed that way for 75 years and became red listed when
And I agree, there are a few bridges on, just like you mentioned, and because there are, they bring them up and say, well, red listed bridges is not accurate. Well, the fact is, the red list bridge is going to increase from, if we do nothing, it's going to increase to over 200 by the year 2020. Now, that's all going to be deterioration. That's all going to be structural. That's not going to be any obsolete bridges. That's going to be, the list will grow. And we are closing 10 to 12 bridges, municipal bridges a year. We're closing them because the DOT doesn't have the authority to close them, but they inspect them once a year. And they say to the town, we recommend this is structural and you should close it. Well, the towns have, I think in every case but one, done that because they don't want to be liable if they were told that the bridge is structurally bad, and nobody wants a catastrophe. And that's one thing no proponents have been saying that bridges are going to collapse. Mm-hmm. No, but bridges will be taken out of service. And a bridge is taken out of service, it might as well not be there because you have to go around. And then you've got to factor in gas mileage to go around, inconvenience to lifestyles, everyday life. So there's a lot of things that work here, and that's why people here are trying to do the right thing and try to do it fairly and try to do it in the least painful way. And again, I still believe that a phased-in small gas tax is the way to do that.
There's a possibility, though, in response to your question, that nothing will happen. And that sometimes and often happens in government, as we all recognize that there is a problem, maybe of varying intensity. We think it exists, but we have to take care of our roads. That certainly is a governmental need, and we may not be addressing it at all because there'll be a stalemate between those who think gambling revenue is the way and the only way to go, and those who think a tax increase is the way to go. Mm-hmm. And then there's some of us who say, let's have neither.
Right, but if we're looking, I mean, we're
what you're saying.
and we're trying to bring business into New Hampshire, especially southern New Hampshire. So, I mean, without infrastructure,
businesses
it's
are
tough.
in favor of this for that very reason. We want to be competitive as a state. We want to be able to keep our bridges and roads. I-93 is the major access point to our state, not only for this area, which is directly across the border, but tourists go to the ski areas by going up I-93. It's the main artery that connects Boston to New Hampshire, and tourism is a big part of our state's economy.
But it's not without pain, because businesses have approached me, and I think they testified in committee that it's going to increase their cost as well, and there's a multiplier effect.
Well,
there.
there's a trickle-down effect. As we all see, the supermarket, everything has gotten more expensive. They're making smaller packages and putting the same product in it and just presenting it different. But for the most part, everything is getting more expensive. And I understand that it's going to get more expensive to repair the bridges. But then when you have that...
Exponentially, and that's the thing. It gets more expensive. If you kick the can down the road, if we say, well, we can't afford it this year, and that's been the reason it's gone 20 years, that we always say, this is not the right time. In the meantime, gas prices have gone up,
Well,
300%.
Perhaps if the DOT starts looking at these red-listed bridges and put more of a priority on them, as Representative O'Brien has said, there's really nothing wrong with the bridge in his town that's red-listed.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, there are a few of those obsolete ones, but believe me, there are plenty of red-list bridges on that list that are structurally bad, and they do put a priority on it. In fact, there are less red-list bridges now than there were 5 years ago. And you know why? We're spending our money on red-list bridges. That's a priority. In the 10-year highway plan, we put 60 red-list bridges into the 10-year highway plan. We are trying to allocate our resources in the most effective way. And there's no question that red-list bridges are a priority. In spite of that, with the current revenues, that number is going to continue to grow over the next, because there's something called a pink list bridge, which is a bridge that's about to become a red list bridge. So they keep track of these bridges very carefully. And because of that, I think we don't have to worry about a catastrophe, and God forbid that ever happens, but I think we will be looking at more and more bridges closing.
Right. What about bonding? I mean, we know the bond rates are really, really low. So, I mean, is that an option as well? I mean, with bonding, if you spread it out over 30 years, the users today and the users 10, 15, 20 years from now will actually pay a fair share as well.
If you look at the spreadsheets that show where the money goes, it shows $22 million a year to I-93. That's the cost of a bond payment over 15 years. And 15 years is what they usually want to do, because at the federal highway, and that's the preferred way to do it. So that's showing right there. That's $22 million a year in revenue we don't have today in order to finish I-93. And you're right, bonding is the way to go, because the interest rates are about 2%.
And the argument is well taken, that if you're going to have infrastructure that's going to be used over years, then those who are using it over years ought to be the ones paying for it. So
Right.
that's good borrowing, as opposed to bad borrowing.
I'll go back to my thing here, that New Hampshire has the best roads in New England now. With this chart, it says that we have 16% bridges are functionally obsolete. So
of that 140, probably 16% of that list is probably functionally obsolete versus structurally defective, and I accept that. But when you pick off the bridges, how expensive are the bridges to fix? That's not factored in, and that is not talking about roads. That's talking about bridges.
I have the other side.
Okay,
it goes into the roads, and it says New Hampshire's percentage of roads in less than good condition. It's we're the lowest in New England at 34%.
That's exactly where it's at. 34. It's 37 actually, but that's probably a little older. But the fact is, that's nothing to be proud of, because Massachusetts has worse roads doesn't mean that we should allow ours to be.
Well,
and they're spending a lot of money. Vermont, by the way, is raising their gas tax, or they're debating raising it 7 cents all at once right now across the border. Massachusetts is talking about 3 cents on their gas tax more, and also a big chunk of it coming out of raising their income tax. The other states are going to do it. Do we want to be competitive with them? We want to keep our roads and bridges the best. And they used to be by far the best. I remember when I was a kid coming up from Massachusetts, you'd come over the border and it'd be rumble, 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 then nice and smooth in New Hampshire. It's not that way now.
You hear the tires when you're in the station wagon. I know. I remember.
And New Hampshire should be the best. And we want to be the best. We want to be the most competitive. And we want to be able to bring in businesses, hang on to the businesses we have, and bring new businesses in. It's about jobs and the economy, and this is a jobs bill and economy.
My point is that all these other states in New England have income tax and sales tax, and they're probably spending a ton of money on their roads, right? But yet
No, I think most of them use the gas tax exclusively. I believe. I'd have to check that. I'm pretty sure that's been a source of revenue for most states for a long time, because when the automobiles were invented in the early 1900s, they had to figure out some way of paying for roads. And they decided, well, gasoline is here and everybody needs gasoline, so that seemed the fairest way to do it. That hasn't really changed today. I still believe it's the fairest way to do it.
Representative Webb, a state that doesn't have a political culture where they recognize that they have to make spending choices and they make wise choices, which is what is the culture that I think is reflected in our amendment, is a state like Vermont or Maine or Massachusetts, where if they come across a need, they just increase the tax to address it without looking at alternatives. New Hampshire was always a state that looked at alternatives first. We've identified a very, very, not only plausible, but accurate alternative to the tax increase this cycle, maybe next cycle, maybe a few cycles. At some point will we have to do it? Sure. We're going towards electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, lighter vehicles. They have much better gas mileage. Either we're going to have to increase the gas tax or we're going to have to look at another way to get money to repair our highway infrastructure. We're not there now, and it's cruel, particularly to low-income people, to increase it unnecessarily.
But it's common sense and fiscally responsible to fix something that's only going to get more expensive down the road. If you had a leak in your living room roof, would you let it just keep getting worse and flood the whole house, or would you have to go and say, well, you know what, we're going to have to fix that. We're going to have to raise the money to fix that.
Well,
and that's what we're at. We're at that point, because when you kick the can down the road, it doesn't become, it's not just the same cost. It becomes more expensive. The problem becomes more expensive. So when you kick the can down the road, you're saying, well, I'm just deferring that expense. You can defer whether you're going to buy a new pair of shoes. You can't defer the leaky roof. If you don't fix it, it causes more damage and it's more expensive to fix.
I'll go with that leaky roof for a second here. If I had a leak in my roof when I was unemployed and I was barely getting by working 2 jobs, as some of these people are doing, would I put a bucket under that leak until I can afford to fix it? I mean, right now the economy's bad. Everything's going down the tubes. For, you know, every time Wall Street it'll come on, you'll see the price of gasoline, the stock market goes up. Right, price of gasoline is driven by a lot of different factors, but what happens is the person, or the average person, or the young person just trying to get by, that $2.40 a week, which is, you know, $10 a month, is going to make a difference to them.
And your point is well taken. We make choices. You know, if you do have a leak in your roof, you might have to realize this isn't the year that I buy a new suit.
But the leaky roof eventually destroys your furniture, destroys your walls, the mold comes into it. It goes from being a small fix to a major fix. Well, as a state, I think we need to make that choice. And 4 cents, 4 cents, 4 cents over a period of 3 years is the alternative to having us to replace the whole living room set.
But families make choices in how they spend the money, and sometimes they don't have a choice. They have to fix the leaky roof. Here you're saying there's no choice. You have to fix the roads.
Because of the charts.
But then we have to make choices of how else we spend our money, rather than immediately going out and telling people, open your wallets, we're in for some more money.
But I think we've exhausted all the one-time fixes. I think we are at the point where we need to turn to the gas tax.
Excellent.
All right, well, actually, we're running out of time here, so.
that went by really fast, didn't it?
So I'd like to close by thanking you both for being on our show. Our show you could find it on the internet on derrylounge.com. We also have a YouTube channel, which is Legislators Lounge on YouTube, and we also have a Facebook page. Any one of those will have links on. This particular bill is up on our webpage. You can click on the number, and it'll bring you right to the bill and the text in the bill. If you click on the photos, there'll be a photo of both of you representatives, and if you click on the photo, it'll actually bring it to your state website that they put up for us. And hopefully you'll have your personal websites linked off of that. So if anybody has any questions or would like to discuss this or contact you, the information is right there on derrylounge.com.
We appreciate it.
Great.
Okay, and thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us on, and I want to thank Representative Campbell for his work on this bill, because I think he does care very deeply about this issue, and his willingness to discuss different approaches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we're off. Yeah, very good. That hour went by fast,
that
didn't
was
it?
Did
quick.
go by fast. It did.
You must forget the cameras are there, right? You just start talking.
You do after a while, sure.
Yeah, and you know, I agree.